Well, welcome everyone to this kind of special midweek edition of our podcast as we turn to looking at the Gospel of Luke. Today we're going to talk a little bit about that very first four chapters of Luke as we look at the birth narrative, a very famous story for us as people of faith, surrounded an awful lot by a certain amount of nostalgia and sentimentality.
Yes.
I hope that we can take a little look at it apart from the celebration of Christmas and talk a little bit about some of the details that are unique to the Gospel of Luke and the story that is there. Again, reminding everybody that the gospel narratives never intended to be biographies of the person of Jesus. They intended to tell the story of his life in a way that proclaimed the truth that they knew in him. So we start, as I said, with the birth narrative, the first three and a half chapters. We start with the announcement and the birth of John the Baptist. Luke begins by telling the story of Zechariah in the temple, and the announcement that comes to him, bringing back to all that are hearing the story, the number of times in the what for us is the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, couples that were not expected to have children had children. You think of Abraham and Sarah late in life having a child, and Hananiah and Samuel's father's name was Dad.
Hannah and Dad.
Sorry, folks.
Okay.
Probably should have looked it up.
It's all
but
we get the point.
There you go. We begin with Zechariah in the temple. An interesting interlude. One of the things that I find intriguing in looking at the story of the announcement to Zechariah and then the annunciation to Mary, it seems almost as if both Zechariah and Mary ask the same question.
That's what I marked.
But they don't.
No, it's close.
They're very close. They're very close.
Yep.
Zechariah's question seems to be coming more from a place of doubt. When he hears it, Zechariah asks, in my translation, how can I be sure of this? How can I know this? Give me a promise that it is going to happen. Which is a question of doubting and an uncertainty. Mary asks, how will it happen? Which is more of a question of faith. I believe it will, I just don't understand how.
And I think I was saying that was some of the same things I did. It's like it was interesting because they, as you said, how they both asked a question about it. But yes, in that sense, when you look at it, mine says the same thing. How can I be sure of this? My wife and I are very old. Where hers is that more of, well, how's it going to happen?
Right. It's more of a, I don't understand how this is possible.
Yes.
I believe it will happen. I just don't know how.
How it's going to happen. Yeah.
Whereas Zechariah is asking more in terms of, well, give me a sign that it's going to happen, closer to Gideon and his famous fleece.
Absolutely.
So, well, we get certainly need to take a pause at the greeting of Mary and Elizabeth. Luke says to us that they are relatives, they are cousins of some form. In the ancient world, cousin was a broadly understood term. Could be anything between first cousins to 225th cousins. No real sure definitive place there. But if you take Luke's understanding, which is not shared by the other three gospels, but if you take Luke's word for it that they were relatives, that necessarily means that Mary was of the tribe of Levi and married outside of the tribe of Levi to marry Joseph, but brings in that line of Levi.
Yeah, absolutely. And just and going into the whole and seeing this whole narrative and in there, I mean, and there's obviously a big difference age gap between Elizabeth and Mary, and so that even tells you too. You doubt that they're first cousins because I mean when you have that much of a large age gap, as you said, it kind of is running like it could have been very, however far cousin, however they call cousin removed, whatever you want to call it, very far in there. But it does make it think that. But even when the angel says to her, to Mary, after he says, the Holy Spirit come to you, he says to her, look, even in her old age, your relative Elizabeth has conceived, and so even the angel is saying to her how she is now 6 months pregnant. It's like it's something new that Mary probably didn't even realize, which wondering how the family connections were. Of course, they didn't live like right next door either. I mean, she traveled a good ways once she found out about that, and I think that was more of a confirmation for her. Not only has there is a miracle for her, but there's also been a miracle for her relative, her cousin, whichever Elizabeth, of how things have happened in their life too. For that,
and there's every reason to believe, again, using this particular story, there's every reason to believe that Mary would have essentially been required to go live with her cousin Elizabeth. Because it's all well and good that those of us who are people of faith and 2,000 years removed and have heard this story a million times, and we affirm, I believe in Jesus Christ, his only son, who was conceived of the Virgin Mary. I mean, we believe that as an article of faith. On the other hand, if you were in a small village like Nazareth, a small town like Nazareth, and a 14, 15-year-old girl says, I'm pregnant, but don't worry, it's by the Holy Spirit, I'm not sure everybody's going to buy that.
Right. Yeah.
And so there probably was a fair bit of shame and tongue wagging that went on around her.
Yeah.
So Mary goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, and she sings that iconic prayer, the Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord. And in that particular song, we hear the echoes of Hananiah's song that I mentioned just a minute ago, Samuel's mother, who prayed very much the same thing, sang very much the same message. We hear an ongoing theme through all of the scriptures, this what the Roman Catholics refer to as a preferential option for the poor. And we hear the song of things being overturned, the hurling down from the thrones the kings and lifting up the humble, filling the hungry and sending the rich away empty. I think we in North America tend to celebrate that as a kind of spiritual truth. We're not real sure that we want the rich sent away empty. Thank you very much. We kind of like being rich.
Yeah. And as you know, the story of Zechariah was, like, if you want to say punished, whatever you want to say, but he was mute. He ended up not being able to speak because of his disbelief. And then as the time comes now that, as Mary's there and Elizabeth's about to give birth, and she gives birth, of course, to John, and they say, asking Elizabeth, "What's the name?" And she says, "John," and they're like, "Why? Like, that doesn't matter. That's name's not even in your family. Like, why are you doing it?" And then uh, Zechariah writes down his name should be John, and all of a sudden
No, that's
he's
not
able to
what he
speak.
writes.
Well,
He writes his name
is
is
John.
John.
Yeah.
He's not declaring a future reality.
Well,
He
mine
writes
says
down.
his name will be John, so that's what my version says. But that's
Oh.
okay. But that's okay. So, but either way, so we know either aspect. We know John is there. But in all aspects, uh, oh, you're right. Never mind. That was Elizabeth. Mine says his name is John. Yes, you're right. So I had to look at the right thing. Anyway, we know his name was John, and at that point, Zechariah is able to speak, and he begins to praise God, um, and in doing these things, and then he begins this uh, prophecy, like sort of like I like to. It says a prophecy, but almost like a to like I say this is Zechariah's song now. Mary had her time of thing. This is Zechariah's time to lift and to say how God has blessed them and what's going to happen and come about with this, and how through it's just a wonderful thing of how he even says it's almost like a prophecy to John. It says, "You, child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his way, and you will tell people how to be saved through the forgiveness of their sins. Because of God's deep compassion, the dawn from heaven will break upon us to give light to those who are sitting in darkness." And so it's almost like he's basically like prophesying to John. This is this is what is going to happen in that aspect.
Well, and invoking that image from Malachi,
Yeah.
of sending a messenger before. We mentioned when we were going through Malachi, and also through the story of the kings and the story of Elijah, that there was this refrain of anticipation that Elijah would return to inaugurate the presence of the Messiah. And it's very important for us as Christians, I think, to remember that if John the Baptist isn't Elijah, then Jesus isn't the Messiah. It is a both and thing. It matters that John the Baptist is all of these things. It matters that John the Baptist is the one who is in the spirit of Elijah. That John the Baptist is preparing the way. That's not just getting things ready. That's fulfilling the story so that Jesus can be the Messiah.
Absolutely. And so after this and after Zechariah's prophecy, you get into the real, all this happens just in one chapter, in just chapter 1. And then as chapter 2 begins, it talks about the census that Quirinius, however you say his name,
well, Linus said Quirinius, and
yes,
so
Quirinius, however you say it. Yes,
I think most of us of our age remember this particular passage from chapter 2, with Linus putting his
yes,
his blanket
his
over
blanket.
his head and telling the whole story.
Yep. Yep.
Chapter 2 is incredibly iconic,
Yes.
and I don't want to take anything away from it. But I think I think that it is important for us to remember that Luke tells this story with a message in mind, and the message is more important. In the ancient world, the message was more important to an author than the factuality. That's hard for us as moderns to put our mind around. But that he begins this story with a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census should be taken. Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went off to be registered. Sets the story in a particular political context. And that's what he is doing in this. There does not appear to have been a census at that particular moment. There were occasionally enrollments, as they were called. The census in the ancient world was not quite like the census we do once every 10 years. It was a means of taxation. It was about taxing. And if Joseph had to go back to Bethlehem, it necessarily means that Joseph had property in Bethlehem. He had family. He had a reason to go back to Bethlehem. As we mentioned when we were talking about the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew and Luke each know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and grew up in Nazareth. Yeah. And they just arrange those two truths in different ways. In Matthew, Joseph and Mary are from Bethlehem and moved to Nazareth after going to Egypt. Yeah. In Luke, they are from Nazareth and only spending time in Bethlehem and going back home. Yep. I think that we can definitely say the two truths, that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and grew up in Nazareth, are solid. How that came about may be a little bit difficult. If Joseph owned property in Bethlehem, you got to start wondering, well, why wasn't he living on the property? And the most likely scenario under that is that the land that he had wouldn't produce enough for his family. And so while he wanted to keep it as his family inheritance, it would not support his family. And so he had to go to Nazareth to work. And Nazareth, in the first century, Nazareth was a workers' village. That's where the phrase that we use all the time is carpenter. The Greek word is teknon, and it means a builder, a construction worker of some form, or maybe it means he was a finished carpenter. It could mean any of the above. But that he needed to go there for work. Yeah. So he probably came, again, within the context of the Luke story. He and Mary came back to Bethlehem. The chances are then that they went to one of Joseph's relatives to stay with them. Because again, we hear there was no room for them in the inn, and we think, Holiday Inn, Best Western, but there just really weren't those in the ancient world. People had room for guests when family came, but there were not even the taverns and kind of things of the late Middle Ages,
Right.
up into the 18th and 19th century. Those did not exist. People stayed with relatives, and the chances are that, again, when it says that there was no room for them in the inn, that's a reference not to a or the Jesus was born in a manger, a stable. That probably was not a separate building. It was probably the downstairs of the house.
Yeah.
In the first century, people didn't have barns.
Right.
They brought the animals into the house with them.
I think there, yeah. In fact, my version says there was no place for them in the guest room. It doesn't even use in the Common English version, but and we say this and things because and then we think too, you know, as we're thinking about this, it's the other thing that we do think of is when we think of manger, we think of this wooden feeding trough that he was in, which most likely was not. He was probably in some kind of concrete stone that he was sat on and laid on, which is a whole different picture of when you think of what you're thinking of and how we portray it. But in my Bible at home, it actually had a picture of it, of what it may have looked like, and it was one of those things like a really hard thing to stone that they would have laid him in, not a wooden thing filled with hay.
Right, right. I do. I'm sure you remember as well as I do when visiting Bethlehem, being shown ancient mangers.
Yeah.
And they were large stone, large pieces of stone with a little hollow that you could put hay in. Um, the Near East, the area of Israel, doesn't have a whole lot of trees.
Yeah.
They got a bunch of stone.
Yeah.
They made everything out of stone,
Yeah.
including the feeding troughs for animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that all of that brings us back to one of the fundamental themes of the Gospel of Luke. And that is this place of poverty.
Yep.
And the call that it puts on all of us as people of faith. That for Luke, again and again, it is the outcast, the marginalized, the impoverished that are the place where God appears. And those that receive the good news, and those that are renewed. And if the margins are where God is going to be discovered, then that's where the people of God need to go. That's where we are called.
Yeah. And part of that goes, I mean, it's part of the announcements to the shepherds, exactly that. When it comes out, shepherds at that time were probably a despised occupation. I mean, people didn't just look at them. They saw them as dirty, filthy, probably even homeless because they were out in the fields. And so in a sense, it was just...
Well, and sheep smell.
Yeah, just anything. I mean, just not. And they weren't Jews, It wasn't like they were part of they were outsiders. I mean, in a sense, as part of the bringing them in, and that is just part of the shepherds. Was just they just weren't the normal people. They were people that people didn't want to be around. In that sense,
60 years ago, the phrase used to be "our kind of people."
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
They just weren't. They just weren't.
Right.
And again, Mary and Joseph weren't. I mean, as we go on with the story of the infancy and childhood of Jesus, you have in the Gospel of Luke 2 more stories that are unique to Luke. First, the story of the presentation, and the prayer of Simeon, and the prophecy of Anna, and Mary brings in that gift two turtle
Till
doves,
Yep.
which is a small little detail, but
Very-
it's important
Yes.
because that was the, well, if you can't afford to it,
Yes.
then you
Those are
can
the
do
little
this.
ones, yeah.
It was the lower
Yep.
sacrifice after a child, which speaks to Joseph and Mary's faithfulness and commitment to the
Yep.
life of faith and their poverty.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it wasn't like he got into a wealthy family and anything like
No,
that. I mean, it was very, and that was clearly signed there by that giving of the two turtle doves. It says that's what they could afford to do, and that's what they had to do. And they just weren't part of the families that gave the larger sacrifice because it wasn't who they were.
and then we get the story of the child Jesus in the temple. Now, it does not say the age of Jesus, but the likelihood, given the story, is that he was 13, and that this was in some sense his bar mitzvah, his taking the mantle of the law as a child, and amazingly being more schooled than others, than the experts in the law, and getting left behind, and all of the aspects of that.
Yep.
Well, we conclude with with this portion with John the Baptist and the temptation narrative in chapter 3, verse 1. We get the first true datable moment in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, which is the year 29 CE. And then we move into the temptation. The interesting thing about the temptation is that Matthew and Luke both tell the story and both tell the same three temptations, but in different order. For Matthew, the temptation ends with the temptation to power. I will give you all of these kingdoms. With Luke, the temptation ends with certainty. Throw yourself off the temple and survive. Then you will know that you are God's son. And I think that each of them tells a little bit different. And we end today's podcast with the enigmatic verse 13. When the devil had finished each temptation, he left him until another opportunity. That phrase has been reflected on some through the years. The movie and book that came out some years ago, The Last Temptation of Christ, was ground in a reflection of what would be another opportunity. Luke never returns to that phrase, never comes back to it, and it's just an opportunity for us to reflect.
Yep. Good. Well, we thank you for joining us in this section, and we'll pick up again next week of the going into the next about roughly 10 chapters of Luke to get us about halfway through. So we hope that you enjoyed this time, and we'll tune in again next week.
Thank you.